Hello and welcome to TV Talks, a show where I take a look at both the good and the bad of what television has to offer. Recently, I talked about 4Kids TV and all of its television incarnations, as well as their basic business practices and shows. Go ahead and check this video out first because I think it'll explain everything that I have to say here and give a lot of context and background information. But in short, they started off doing things that weren't nearly as bad as what people think, but then eventually saw that sweet cash money and then decided to go corporate and get ultra corrupted, leading them to become one of the most hated companies in television history. Even so, I still grew up with 4Kids and I still loved it to pieces. Most of it, at least. Okay, half of it. Some shows. I liked some shows. The show that I liked most was their biggest flagship franchise, and the one that stayed on the network until the day it died a horrible, horrible death, Sonic X. And for the record, I will be talking about both the Japanese and the English versions in this because I rewatched both series. So now I can actually talk about them in great detail as well as compare them because Sonic X was one of the most edited shows in 4Kids library. However, like in the last video, I'm gonna state my case on this, and I hope you guys understand. So please, before you get angry and talk trash, just watch the rest of the video, because it'll make more sense towards the end. But I have a feeling this is gonna be another long one, so strap in and be patient. So, Sonic X started up when TMS and Sega decided to make another Sonic show, which Sonic had had a pretty shaky library of shows. People are very split on Sonic the Hedgehog, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, that one. People seem to really like Sonic Sat AM, and people generally despise Sonic Underground, despite having a cool name, which sadly was the best part about the show. But Sonic X, an anime about Sonic. They pumped it up big in Japan, but they really pumped it up big in America. Because 4Kids TV, then known as the Fox Box, which was the best incarnation out of all of their TV divisions, they had this huge marketing campaign for Sonic X with at least 7 different commercials for it. I'm not talking about a commercial that they aired 7 times, I'm talking about 7 different commercials that they would constantly air, revving you up for Sonic X. It's like they went forward in time and knew just how successful this was going to be, so they wanted to get even more popular by promoting it extra. That, or they saw that it failed in the future, then they decided to do whatever they could to fix it, and then it caused an alternate reality where it actually was a big hit. Then I'm gonna go with the first one, that's kinda, it fits their image more. And like last time, I'm going to be reviewing it as I go along, explaining the plot and the history. Because like a lot of anime, each season's a bit different. However, unlike a lot of anime, the story arcs in here don't take up the whole season. Half of it is what they call filler episodes. Only Sonic X is kind of meant to be more of an episodic series. It's kind of like Teen Titans in a sense where there's a lot of regular 30-minute standalone episodes, and then there's a couple 2-parts here and there, as well as the season's big overall story, which usually happens around the end. The show lasted for 3 seasons, spanning from 2003 to 2006. And funny enough, it wasn't that huge in Japan. I mean, it was decently successful, but it didn't catch on as much as they thought. But in America, America's the one that really made Sonic X huge. People went nuts over it, and it was easily 4Kids TV's biggest hit next to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, which they lost shortly after Sonic X ended. So yeah, they kind of had to rely on endless reruns of Sonic X. And before I get into any more information, here's my personal history with Sonic X. This is what got me into Sonic. This is what made me a Sonic fan. To be fair though, I'm not one of those crazy Sonic fans who, role plays or does any of that. I like Sonic a lot. I may have been a Nintendo person, but I liked Sonic more than Mario. Except in Smash Brothers, because I suck at Sonic in Smash Brothers. Some of my very good friends showed me Sonic X one day. And then I got hooked ever since. I shortly after bought Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut, then a little bit after that Sonic Heroes, and then eventually got my way around to buying Adventure 2 Battle, and those were 3 of my favorite games as a kid. I mean, sure, I had some other favorites that were right up there, but those are the ones I played the most. And to this day, I still have quite the fondness for Sonic. While I will admit that he has been in quite a few bad games, especially lately, I still definitely look back on the glory days and still just kind of remember just how much that me and my friends really liked it. And the day we saw the Sonic X finale, which, I'll get to that when the time is right. But I didn't watch Sonic from when it first premiered, even though I was watching the Fox Box around that time. I caught a little bit of the first episode, but I had to leave for something, I can't remember what specifically. But then eventually down the road, I just kind of didn't catch up with it until they introduced it to me, and then I started loving it. So yeah, this was one of my favorite shows as a kid. But how's it hold up now? Well, let's take a look. This is the TV Talks of Sonic X, both the Japanese and the English version. And the Japanese and the English versions have the same story, generally. It's about Sonic, Dr. Eggman, Tails, Knuckles, and all those other guys accidentally using Chaos Control and then getting teleported to Earth. While there, Sonic and his friends end up meeting a boy named Chris Thorndyke, whose parents are super rich and super busy, and you know, it's going to be one of those stories, isn't it? Yes and no, but I'll tell you about that in just a moment. Chris isn't all that lonely though. He's got some good friends. He's got his grandpa Chuck, a crazy inventor, his butler Mr. Tanaka, who is a kind of Japanese stereotype in a sense, and his boisterous maid Ella, who, fun fact, in the 4Kids English version is actually voiced by the same man who plays Dr. Eggman. Crazy, huh? I actually didn't know that until I just rewatched it recently. So it's about Sonic and all his friends trying to stop Dr. Eggman while he's trying to destroy the city, as well as Chris's exploits in learning about Sonic's world and just his overall adventures. So both versions kind of have this little issue where Chris kind of takes up more spotlight than Sonic sometimes. Not all the times, but a little bit of the time it seems more like Chris X than it is Sonic X. Sonic is pretty much always there except for 1 or 2 episodes, but even still, Chris does take up a lot of the spotlight. However, in the Japanese version, he's an alright character, but in the English version, while kind of having pretty much everything intact, the voice is pretty annoying and the inflections, he just comes across as more of an annoying and useless character in the 4Kids dub. And yeah, I think now is as good a time as any to talk about the censorship. As I've said before, 4Kids had the habit of taking a lot of stuff in the animes that they had and then reworking it so it would be more appropriate for kids and Western audiences. And like I said, Sonic X may have been one of the biggest edits, but it's one of the most overhated for these reasons. 1, the Americanization thing isn't that bad. Is a rice ball getting turned into a cheeseburger or wine get turned into soda, is that really gonna ruin the whole cartoon? No, it's not. It's just a little thing. 2, in Japanese TV, especially children's TV, you can get away with a lot more, similar to what you can do in Canada, only way, way further. You can have a little bit of swearing, you can have death, you can have violence, you can have sexual content, you can have a lot of stuff like that. In America, especially the early 2000s, you couldn't do that. You could for adults, but not for kids. And yes, they were intended for the same demographic, so there were some cultural changes. And then finally, this is the biggest one, Sega and TMS, the creators of Sonic X, actually asked 4Kids to tone it down a bit and to make it more acceptable for Western audiences. So they actually asked them to America it up a bit. Granted, as this series would go on, they would kind of overstep their boundaries and go a little too far. And then they would also go too far in the edits. Yeah, so in the first season and a half, the edits weren't that bad. There were a couple things here and there that were kind of head scratching and kind of, what the heck are you doing? But a lot of the edits made sense and a lot of them were actually alright. Towards the middle of the second season is where things start getting shaky, and then the third season is where it really goes too far. But we're not at the third season yet, and oh boy, I've been wanting to talk about the third season ever since I saw it as a kid, because I still remember what I thought of it, and I want to share it now because my opinion hasn't really changed. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Let's talk about Season 1 of Sonic X. So both the Japanese and the English versions have actually really good voice casts. They do a lot of the same kind of inflections and the same kind of mannerisms in their voice, but they manage to do completely different portrayals sometimes. And that's an okay thing. Unless it's really annoying, like some of the stuff they do in 4Kids. Such as Chris Thorndike or Bo Koon. Those two characters are pretty annoying, especially the latter, who whenever he shows up, it's pretty much an "oh no" reaction from a lot of people. And those characters are alright in Japan, for the most part. Every character seems to have that one moment that kind of annoys everybody, in both versions. But the first few episodes were dedicated to Sonic kind of learning about Earth and getting to know Chris and stuff. The first episode was basically him on the run from the police, and the head of the police is basically a drag racer who happens to be Chris Thorndike's uncle, and his name is Sam Speed. That's right, his name is Uncle Sam. Remember, Sega and TMS were okay with this and suggested it, so don't blame 4Kids for something that they asked for and approved of. And along the way, Sonic picks up more of his friends, like Tails, Amy, Cream the Rabbit, and even Big gets a cameo here and there. Oh, jeez. Yep, because this came out around the time of Sonic Adventure, so of course they had to throw him in there. Wonderful, because that's what all the Sonic fans liked, right? They love Big the Cat. Well, for me, I didn't find him as bad, but that's not relevant. The series starts off with pretty standard writing levels, pretty good. The humor is nothing really special, especially in the 4Kids version. The Japanese one can get away with a little bit more, so it's got a little bit more good stuff in there, but it's not quite stellar yet. But as the show goes on and it finally kind of gets its footing, it realizes what it is and what it wants to be. Specifically with its first story arc, the Chaos Emerald Saga, which is basically just kind of the standard Sonic formula. There are 7 Chaos Emeralds scattered all around Area X, and Sonic and Eggman race against each other and all sorts of weapons and crazy stuff to get those Chaos Emeralds, and then they can do whatever they want with them, such as Eggman being evil and then Sonic being good and that kind of stuff. While it is just kind of a standard Sonic thing, they actually do it pretty well. As it's typical with these kind of shows to have the first arc still be pretty exciting, but also a bit more basic. You know, that way you can kind of get used to the show and know what it's going to be. Being a fun and exciting action comedy show. And we got to know the characters pretty well. Sonic is laid back and likes having a good time, but still stands up for what's right. Tails is a bit of a gearhead and ends up getting really close with Chuck because of it. And he's kind of Sonic's right-hand man. Knuckles is a hothead who will always love to fight. Rouge is seductive and is really greedy. Cream is kind of wimpy and cowardly, Amy's obsessed with Sonic, and Chris is annoying. We get all these characters introduced and, you know, all that stuff really early on, but we really get to know them during this arc, because that's when their character traits really get to shine. And that's ultimately when things really start getting better. However, it's also really where 4Kids decides to take a hatchet to some stuff. Because, of course, it's going to be a bit of an action stuff. There's going to be some stuff that won't be suitable for kids, somewhat. Now, when it comes to the violent stuff, that's when it seems to be kind of the most of the head-scratching moments. The sexual stuff and the cultural things, that kind of makes sense. But the violence is kind of where it gets to a gray area. Because 4Kids, even back in the Foxbox era, which I still praise and defend heavily, they still had some pretty weird standards. They let some things fly and let some things not. Like, I guess they went on how intense the moment was, or how many explosions, or I don't know. But some of this stuff just kind of makes you wonder. And it's not so much in the action as it is in the dialogue, too. There's a lot of times where 4Kids will try to edit the dialogue. A lot of the times it's pretty much a straight lift from the Japanese stuff. Other times they'll just rework the jokes a little bit to make it have a little bit of a different context. But either way, they still land. And it's kind of complicated with the jokes, speaking of those, because sometimes they will change it, and then sometimes they will be just as good as the Japanese stuff. Sometimes they'll be a little worse, or sometimes, in very, very rare instances, they'll actually be a little bit better. And then a lot of the times, they'll just kind of pick and choose whichever one you like better. For the action, though, and the story moments, even back then, the Japanese one had the upper hand here. I mean, don't get me wrong, the 4Kids stuff is still good. It's still great suspense, great action, great animation, and some pretty good deliveries from the characters, even if some of the reads do turn out a little cringy, and they do kind of turn out a little all kind of goofy, specifically from some certain characters, like Sonic sometimes might have a weird read here and there, but the guy who always hits it out of the park is Mike Pollock as Eggman. There's a reason that he's still around today playing the character, because everybody loves him and everybody considers him the best Eggman, myself included. But still, even him, with his great performance, he can't truly elevate the 4Kids dub over the original Japanese version, and that's expected. But that doesn't make it bad, it just makes it a bit inferior, so far. The first season was pretty solid. It had some pretty good humor, especially as it went on. Some good story stuff, even if it was a little bit of a loose arc here and there, like it did have a bit more episodic stuff, but that's understandable. That's kind of how some first seasons of shows everywhere go. It takes time to introduce you to the conventions of the story, what the show is going to be like, the tone, the characters. It's all standard fare for a first season. The 4Kids thing isn't, like, amazing, but it's still good. And there are some parts, though, that do get a little cringy, and some editing choices that don't really make much sense in retrospect. But maybe it's nostalgia playing a little bit of a factor, but I still really like it. But there were some parts that I liked as a kid and I don't really like now. For example, the Bo Koon character, for one. And also, I didn't mind Cream when I was a kid. I thought she was just okay, but I don't know. It's just something about her overly squeaky voice and the fact that she never really contributes anything. It just, I don't know. It's not quite right. She's a bit better in the Japanese one, but even then, she never really goes beyond okay. But as first seasons go, good across the board, although the Japanese one does have a bit of an upper hand right now. But now it's time to get into Season 2. Season 2 decided, hey, you know, Sonic Adventure just came out pretty recently, let's do something based off of that. Because, yeah, that's considered one of the best games in all of Sonic, so of course they're going to try to do something like that. And even though most people knew the story, they still wanted to tell it in a new, interesting way. And yes, now it's time that I mention the big elephant in the room, that the 4Kids dub was originally going to have the actors from Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 in this show, which I say, it's a good thing they didn't do it. I mean, it's not as bad in the second one, but it's still there. But in both of them, the acting is not very good. Specifically with some characters like Eggman or Tails. It's just kind of bad. And Sonic's is okay, but like, it's kind of hit and miss. Sometimes like there will be quite a few weird reads. So yeah, it's fine that they're doing it this way. Besides, these actors have had a lot of experience, and yeah, even they do some pretty cringy lines, but you know what? They still work. And hey, if it weren't for this show, we wouldn't have had Mike Pollock as Eggman. He's great. So Season 2 is really where they start doing a lot more of the story arc stuff. And how did this big story arc that was based off one of their best games ever turn out? Turned out pretty good. Like, actually, no joke. In both sides. Although, again, the Japanese one does have a bit of an advantage here with not having to edit a lot of stuff out. And this one has a little bit of stuff where I can kind of understand why they cut it out, but it could have been left in. This is where the gray area starts fizzling away, though. Because as we get to the end of the season, you could say goodbye to that gray area. Oh yeah. But now they're really cracking down on a lot of stuff, like removing text. They did that before, but now it's really obvious, and now it really shows. And it's in English half the time, too. I mean, yeah, I can understand the Japanese stuff, but why won't you put English text over it to make it say something? Like, there'll be times where Chris or some character will hold up a sign and it's just blank. I mentioned that in my last video, but yeah, that's gonna get a message across. Oh, I totally know that you support X cause or want to convey X thing. It's just really weird, and that is one of them that I, even in the Foxbox era, can never, ever defend, because it's just stupid. Why would you do that? Why would you just remove random text, even if it's in your language and has nothing wrong with it at all, and just not replace it with anything? at least maybe make a joke about it or something, or like put something on the signs or the magazines or books or something. Just try a little. Sometimes there are parts like where they're on books or something where it's okay that there's no text there because it's not necessary, but when it's on things like signs or billboards, it's pretty noticeable. But again, it doesn't really affect the overall quality. It's just another one of those nitpick things, and unlike the Americanization thing, this one wasn't asked for, and this one really doesn't have any reason to exist. But it's not just text and all that. A lot of the action stuff might have had to get trimmed down to some dialogue parts, some legitimately funny moments too. This is where the 4Kids dub really starts deviating from the original Japanese Sonic X series. Now, it's not that bad yet. It's still kind of transitioning out, but don't worry, it'll get there. It'll get there, all right, and when it does, I'll let you know. So the first part of this season was Sonic Adventure, and it was pretty well done. I mean, again, we already knew the story, though, as for those who played the game a lot. But even then, it still had a lot to offer. Chaos looked really, really cool. The action was very well done. More emphasis on Sonic than Chris, although he did have a fair bit to do. There were a few little things that bugged me, like cutting out E105 or the Chaos Emeralds being found in different order, but the latter really just a teeny little nitpick. But yeah, where's Zeta? He was... okay, yeah, he didn't really leave that much of an impression, but that's kind of weird. And hey, at least there was no Big the Cat fishing in here. Sorry for the memories. And then how do they follow up this successful arc? By going, hey, that one was successful, let's do the second one! And okay, sure. Because one of the things that Sonic Adventure 2 has over the first is that the story is a lot deeper. I mean, sure, the story in the first one was pretty good, but it was still pretty basic. This one has a lot to offer. It's got the introduction of Shadow for one, it's got space battles, it's got the Space Colony arc, it's got destroying the Earth with a Death Star-like device. It's got all that, and it's really exciting, and they don't disappoint here. Again, 4Kids really takes a hatchet to this sometimes. But even in there, it's still really good. But again, the Japanese one has the upper hand by just kind of being a bit more exciting. And it is a little personal thing, but the music. The music is good in the 4Kids stuff. The music is good, but specifically starting around here, they're starting to use it in moments where there really shouldn't be music. Now, they did this a few times earlier, where in the original Japanese version there would be little to no music, like maybe a piano in the background or maybe some quiet ambiance sounds, but they put in kind of like loud, blaring, exciting music, and it's I see where they're going, where they're trying to make it cooler, but one of the things they start forgetting about is atmosphere. Sometimes you don't need music, sometimes you just need the bare minimum. Sometimes you'll need like a little bit of a piano accompaniment. We'll get back to this when it gets to the end of the series, because that really puts in a big factor. But in short, less can be more sometimes. And they really start losing track of it here because this is around the time where 4Kids goes corporate. See, back in the Fox Box era, because that was their first programming block on Fox Saturday mornings. However, they decided to rebrand in order to get their company name out there more, and that's because they decided that instead of kind of being a place to house a lot of animation, not just anime, like Stargate Infinity, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or Funky Cops, they decided to just focus on their biggest hits, which were TMNT, which eventually they decided to give up on, and their anime dubs. Yeah. So they kind of decided to get too greedy, and then overall just stop caring about the final product. As long as it made money, they were fine. And that's just sad because a lot of people don't recognize this, but back before 2005-ish, in that era, they actually cared and they actually tried to make good quality stuff. But around 2005, and some shows even just a teeny little bit before, they started losing it and they really started getting greedy and became the 4Kids we all know and hate today. Back then, they were fine. I mean, they weren't the best source of anime, but their original stuff was pretty decent sometimes. and they actually cared about their image and their long-term reputation. Now, in this era of history where we're at this current moment, not present day, but in this point of the Sonic X series, 4Kids is more corporate, and they really just care if the show makes money. Yeah, they'll keep the action stuff and they'll keep the moment, but if they can make it more exciting and cool and hip, maybe they can get more attention and thus they can become a more lucrative business, because that's what 4Kids is now. They're not a distribution of entertainment, they're not an entertainment company, they're a business first and foremost. They lost track of their original goal, something that all networks and companies seem to go through these days, but they went through it the worst because they made it very clear to everybody that this is what they wanted. They weren't like Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon where they at least tried to pretend. They were pretty much outright with it, even to the point of, again, renaming the Fox Box to 4Kids TV just for more name recognition, which ironically ended up hurting them more in the end because people knew who was behind all these monstrosities. But Sonic X wasn't a monstrosity here. While the dub did butcher it a little bit here and there, it still retained a lot of what made it good. And yes, the original Japanese was still really good, but the 4Kids one still had its moments of goodness. And by moments, I mean most of it. It did have a bit of cringe here and there, but it was still overall good. But the Japanese one is where it really gets good, because they're allowed to show more. Again, I recommend you go check this one out, because it's pretty exciting and it actually connects into another arc. That's right, there's 3 arcs this season. However, now that these 2 big action-packed stories have happened, it's time to take a little bit of a rest and just kind of sit back. And ultimately, that's good. This is where filler is needed. We just had not 1, but 2 huge action-packed stories back to back. It's good to just take a little bit of a rest for a bit. Sonic would agree. I mean, half the moon just blew up. I think it's kind of warranted that we have a little bit of a rest break. And we did. The quote-unquote filler episodes turned out to be pretty good, with the first one introducing my favorite characters, Team Chaotix! Okay, this is going to be a little bit of an explaining thing, a little bit personal, but I hope you don't mind this little tangent detour. So for whatever reason, ever since I was young, Knuckles and Team Chaotix, specifically Espio, were my favorite characters. I don't know why, but they still are today. I still really like Knuckles and I still really like Espio, even though he's not used very much. And I'm still a big fan of Vector, although Charmy is pretty annoying these days, in kind of both versions and even the games. But who are Team Chaotix? Well, they're a group of ragtag misfits who have a detective agency, and they just kind of go around accidentally causing trouble. I mean, they try to do good, but they're not really the typical good guys. Although they do align themselves with Sonic and do kind of try to support his cause, they are kind of a business, you know, they are a detective agency. And especially Vector and Charmy, as Espio is a bit more the voice of reason, they can get a little corrupted. They don't always follow the standard tropes. They can be a little backstabby, they can be a little greedy. They can be kind of lazy, they can be kind of selfish. Espio even has some of these moments, and usually he's the one to pull them both back. Even though Vector is obviously the leader, but yeah. He'll even have moments like that, especially later on. Now, they play a very minor role in Season 2, only appearing in a couple episodes, but as the show goes on, they start appearing more and more, and I start liking that, which is good, given what we're about to face. So, Team Chaotix, they had an introduction episode, and it was a good one on both sides. The artist who they got to dub Espio was really good, but the one who they got to do Charmy was so annoying. I mean, I never really liked Charmy a ton. I mean, he was kind of a package deal with Espio and Vector, and it's worth having him around. But whoever that was in the English one really makes me annoyed. The Japanese one is fine. It gets the character off really well. Charmy is fun-loving, he's a kid, he's naive, and he is a bit annoying to everybody, and he's inexperienced, and he's kind of a suck-up to Vector. I got all that in the Japanese version. In the English one, he's just a screechy, kind of SpongeBob wannabe, sort of, sometimes. I mean, he doesn't really sound like SpongeBob, but he is pretty annoying. He's quite obviously related to Hokkun in some way, because they have a very similar voice, and it's not very pleasant to listen to, especially when he starts screeching and wailing. But it's worth it. And we get some more filler stuff that's pretty enjoyable, because the writing really gets its chance to shine. In all honesty, it's been a little bit since we've kind of had these episodes, and now we see how the writing style has changed on both parts. The 4Kids dub really tries to lift a lot of the stuff from Japan, although they do falter here and there, because this is the transition period. This is the part where 4Kids eventually decides to become a business first and foremost. And so that means that that gray area I was talking about and the safe space, pretty much gone. It's from here on where 4Kids really decides to make some ridiculous cuts to this show. Some really strange choices that most of them don't pay off. The closest they get to paying off is just being on par with the original, and that's if they're lucky, because as we get down the road, things are gonna get kind of bumpy. We get the last arc of the first series in the second season. I call it Beginning of the End because that's what the DVD was called, pretty much. That and Friends of the End. I don't remember which one, but I had that DVD, and I didn't see these on first broadcast because I don't know why, but I missed them. I was introduced to the show around this time, but I missed them. So I got the DVD, and oh man, this is a heavy season. It's not big in action. It's not that huge violent thing. This is kind of a sad one, because as it turns out, Sonic's world and Chris's world are somehow connected, and if Sonic stays there too long, he and all of his friends, reality is going to fall apart, and then they're all just going to kind of get frozen, and basically reality is just going to be destroyed and there will be nothing anymore. So it's time for Sonic, Eggman, and everybody to go back to their planet and stay there, never coming back. Even Eggman's okay with this because, well, if reality's gone, there's nothing left to take over. Because it's not just Earth, it's everything. I don't know quite how that works in the 4Kids one, but the Japanese one explains it a bit more. However, this is where Chris gets really good and really bad at the same time. Because everybody does leave, and it's a really heartbreaking scene. Even in the 4Kids one, it's really hard to watch because it's so sad because it makes it look like this is the end, and I have a feeling this was originally the end. I couldn't find a lot of clarification on this, but yeah, everyone's saying goodbye, and we won't be seeing these people again, like interacting with all their friends. Amy says goodbye, Cream says goodbye, Knuckles, Tails, even Eggman and his goons, they even say goodbye to everybody. Granted, it's not emotional and heartfelt, but they do say goodbye and they leave. But Sonic doesn't get that luxury because Chris ends up taking Sonic with him and they run away. So, this is where a lot of people, especially myself, get divided on Chris. It's not that there's like a camp where people say, okay, he's good, and then there's another one that says, oh no, he's in the wrong for this. People, well, there are things like that, but a lot of people are genuinely split themselves, myself included. On one hand, it's understandable. He's had a lot of growth with Sonic, and he doesn't want that to get taken away because his parents aren't around and stuff, so he's finally got someone to go take him on adventures. On the other hand, dude, reality is gonna fall apart if you don't let him go. Stop being a selfish, spoiled brat for once and save the universe. It's gonna be sad, I know, but also, I don't know if you forgot about Mr. Tanaka, Ella, Chuck, and all of your friends. Yeah, you kind of forgot about them, huh? I mean, Sonic is a friend, yeah, and there's Tails and all those other people that you really, really like. But dude, you have to say goodbye for the fate of everybody. If you keep Sonic around, all you're gonna do is kill everybody. And I know it sounds like I'm more in the favor of he's doing it wrong, but the way they do it just makes it seem a bit deeper, and it makes you really sympathize with Chris. In Japan, in 4Kids, they make him really seem like what I described him to be, just kind of a whiny, spoiled brat. In Japan, yeah, he has that vibe, but still we kind of get to really see what he's thinking. And this might be a translation thing, and this might just be 4Kids editing it all together. It's kind of hard to tell. Because ultimately they share a lot of similar vibes, but yeah, in the end, Chris has to give Sonic up. And then there's this actually kind of good moment where he feels like Sonic wasn't actually his friend and that he only stayed because he saved Sonic's life, so Sonic felt like he owed it to him, but that's cleared up. But it was, in both versions, a really good development. It wasn't real, though. It was just something that Chris believed. But it was still a really nice scene and a really nice thing to watch. And it was a pretty sad end, and it was pretty sad overall. As a kid, I was pretty sad at this, mostly because I felt like this was the end of one of my favorite shows. Season 3 came on later. Yep, Season 3, Series 2. Good old Season 3, Series 2. Okay, young me, it's time. The time you've been waiting for to talk about Sonic Season 3. It's awful! As a kid, I had no idea what drove them to do this. Oh no. I'm gonna sound a little bit like an obsessive fan here, but it's been a long time coming. This is how I felt ever since I first saw it. Okay, so Season 3 was very, very hyped on 4Kids TV, not Foxbox like it should be. So it was hyped big, so me and my friends were excited, because one of the things we do is, like, a lot of the time we'd come over to each other's houses and watch the new episode and then just kind of talk about it and just kind of, you know, talk about Sonic and play the Sonic games and just kind of, we liked Sonic. That was it. That was like Saturday morning was our basically our Sonic day. And that was a good tradition that lasted for about 1.5 years, because it started really around Season 2. But that's kind of, and we missed a few days here and there, but that's not really important. So we watched it and we were blown away in the worst way possible. What have they done? The ending for the second season was definitely a final ending. It really gave off a good series of finality. Chris grew up. He learned to get over it, but he still had his fond memories with his old buddy Sonic. We don't quite know about Sonic himself. You know, he's probably still off going fighting Dr. Eggman, but it had a good end. So now Chris comes over interdimensionally and then turns into a kid again, and now it's about Sonic, Tails, and all those other guys boarding a spaceship called the Blue Typhoon and going around the galaxy trying to stop these robot plane hybrids called the Metarex. And their goal is basically to destroy planets and steal their essence, and this isn't Sonic. It's really not. This is, I'm gonna go here, it's the Shadow the Hedgehog of Sonic X. It's getting darker, it's getting edgier, it's reinventing itself purely to stay relevant. And it's bad. It's really bad. I mean, as a standalone show, it'd be just kind of mediocre. It'd be like a Stargate Infinity. But this is Sonic and Sonic X. It had a good continuity. It had a good thing going. They decided to ditch it all in favor of this Star Trek knockoff, because that's inevitably what it becomes. It's just kind of Star Trek with tree robots as a reoccurring enemy, and Eggman, he's still a threat, but he doesn't really get to do very much. They try to make it all edgy and dark, and people seem to die everywhere, and there is a lot of death and stuff, and yes, it makes for it's a good scene, but it just feels wrong. Not just as Sonic, but as the show they set up previously. The first 2 seasons were just kind of lighthearted and fun with, yes, a lot of action and a lot of serious moments. But now it's edgy and gritty and dark. While the Japanese one is guilty of this too, 4Kids is even worse with this. Because not only do they try to do exactly what Japan did, trying to make it tough and dark, but they try to cop out by cutting out certain scenes like Molly's death, which was one of the big kind of sad moments there, which actually was just, it was a decent moment. Didn't make me really feel anything because it just felt so out of place in the show that they're setting up, or had set up previously. In the new show they set up it fits perfectly fine. But yeah, it was a pretty sad scene. But in 4Kids, she just teleports away and they give a bunch of weird random excuses and then just kind of drop it from there. Yeah, it was weird and it just doesn't fit. I remember as a kid going, this can't be Sonic X. It's like, okay, for one, Sonic X had a core central theme. It was about Sonic on the real world, which they ended in the first series. And I know anime changes a lot. They change up their story arcs a lot, but this is basically a whole different show. If they kind of rebranded it, it'd still be bad, but at least it wouldn't have the stigma of being Sonic X. Sonic X was not Star Trek. And if you don't believe me that it's kind of like Star Trek, the Blue Typhoon kind of acts like the Enterprise. The inside kind of looks a lot like the pilot's area. They use a lot of the techno jargon that they use in Star Trek. Some of the enemies are kind of reminiscent of Star Trek. The aliens are kind of reminiscent of some Star Wars, Star Trek things. It just becomes this weird sci-fi adventure. And even then, as a show on its own, it's not very good. The Metarex are just so cringy, especially in 4Kids. In Japan, they try to make them seem dark and edgy because they destroy planets and stuff, but they're not very threatening. They're just kind of lame. They don't really get to do a lot of cool stuff, and even when they do, it just kind of feels wrong. In 4Kids, they give them extra cheesy dialogue, maybe in an effort to make them seem not so scary, but overall, on both sides, what have you guys done? 4Kids might have just been able to be as guilty, but by editing it and trying to cop out of all the dark edginess, they make it worse. They make it so much worse. The only things I can say for it are that Team Chaotix comes back and gets a lot more to do, and the filler episodes are actually better than the story arc. I bet you would never have expected someone to say that and still be alive, but yeah, the writing is still pretty funny sometimes. It's actually pretty decent. Specifically, one of my favorite episodes of the 3rd season, Mission Matchup, which I'm going to talk about that in just a moment because there's a big green, white, skin color elephant in the room that I need to address, the new character of Cosmo. Cosmo is a plant, human, alien, Ralts thing whose planet was destroyed by these Metarex things, and then she ends up joining the group, and then she kind of has a slight romantic thing with Tails, sort of. Tails definitely is falling for her, for sure. And it's hinted pretty strongly that in Japan that Cosmo is definitely returning the favor, but is either too shy or just too distracted or good-natured to do anything about it. Tails is just genuinely too shy. But in 4Kids, it makes it look like they're just kind of friends. Well, it kind of hints very slightly, because I think they just kind of wanted to get rid of that because, oh no, romance. Because, yeah, that totally wouldn't have flown back in your early days when you cared. Oh wait, it would have. How's the character of Cosmo? In both 4Kids version and the Japanese version, she is just, I'm kind of torn because on the one hand, she's a pretty sweet character. She's very sweet, she's very happy, she's very, loving and nurturing. On the other hand, that's basically it. She basically kind of exists to be happy and basically just kind of be treated as really important even though she's not. Well, she is, sort of, but the thing is she doesn't, in the group dynamic at least, she doesn't contribute a lot. She doesn't really do much. She's kind of there with Cream and not really being one of the standout characters, although I do like her a bit more than Cream. And her relationship with Tails starts off pretty cringy, but as it gets down the line, it actually gets a little nice. It's not outstanding, it's not fantastic, but it's kind of nice. And I'm not like a huge shipper in any sort of animation, whether it be anime or actually even any show or game in general. But really, it's kind of nice, and I wouldn't mind if they touched upon this later, except they kind of can't do that. Oh yeah, I'm getting there. Just wait. So yeah, me as a young kid, well not incredibly young, but still, watching this was devastated to see this. I mean, I kept coming back and coming back, hoping that it would get better, but it just never did. Except for those filler episodes, which turned out pretty good, like Mission Matchup, or as it's called in Japan, Team Chaotix Electroshock Love Tactic or something. So basically, Team Chaotix ends up having their ship getting broke down, and then they get aboard the Blue Typhoon in order to get it fixed. And then, upon eavesdropping on one of their conversations, Vector convinces Charmy and Espio that Tails is madly in love with Cosmo and is just too scared to mention it. While that is true, he catches them in a moment of just pure mundanity and just of nothing. So it comes across as like, it's funny because it's true, and funny because he's missing the point at the same time. And then we see Vector, who's normally just kind of this greedy Mr. Krabs with a slight manly edge to him, just kind of like getting all weepy and mopey about it, and like, kind of like a woman watching a soap opera in the 1980s kind of weepy thing. And it's actually really funny in both versions, because this is actually a pretty accurate one. The only thing 4Kids does to edit this episode are two things. One, removing the animations where Vector comes up with his plans, because Vector decides that Team Chaotix owes it to Tails, who is fixing the Team Chaotix ship, to get them together by not just like setting them up on a date, but like a bunch of really stupid, underhanded tactics that make no sense. It's really funny, and they do a lot of animations with these that kind of parody a lot of genres, like the Kung Fu movie romance, or the typical Japanese romance movie romance, stuff like that. And the animations are really funny because they're not really animations, they're kind of almost colored manga things, sort of, and cut out sometimes, and it's really creative. I don't know why 4Kids cut these out, but the other one I can understand. So one of the plans, their very first one, is to knock Knuckles out and then paint over his face and then make him look like an evil guy so that Tails will come to Cosmo's rescue and then she'll be all impressed and then they'll fall in love and that stuff. So they knock Knuckles out and Espio turns invisible and uses Knuckles like a puppet. In the 4Kids one, he parades Knuckles around saying like, Cosmo, I switched sides, I'm fighting for the Metarex now, I'm going to take you prisoner, resistance is useless, stuff like that. But in the Japanese one, Knuckles gets possessed, like he's pretending that he's possessed by like a demon or the devil or something, and I couldn't believe I was watching that, like, because I knew that the Japanese one can get away with more, but this is kind of where I took a bit of a break in my rewatching, but then I was reminded of just how far they could go. And I thought it was really funny on both hands. On the Japanese one, it's funny because it's really edgy and really stupid that they pretend that Knuckles is possessed by the devil or something. But in the 4Kids one, it's funny because of the delivery. In this one, Espio's a lot more unsure, and he's a lot less okay with what he's doing, because in the Japanese one he just kind of goes along with it, but in the American version he goes along making comments like, oh, this is stupid and stuff like that, and he's just so unsure in his delivery, and it's really funny on both parts, especially when Tails comes in and asks what's going on in both versions, and then Cosmo says like Knuckles just said a bunch of weird stuff and started dancing, and even then Espio refuses to break character. The whole episode is just hilarious, although it does get a little sappy and a little weird with the whole romance thing because, well, I'll talk about that, but it kind of gets weird and the whole surprise party thing, and the 4Kids one does nothing to help with the cringe factor. The cringe factor is just a little there, kind of in retrospective for Japan, but the American one, yeah, the dialogue is really corny. But it was kind of corny in the Japanese one too, but they kind of accentuate it a little bit more. But if you're interested, check either version of the episode out, because they're both really funny, actually. The facial expressions on Vector are some of the best I've seen on this show. They are genuinely hilarious, especially this part where he's imagining one of his plans, and then it just fades to him like chuckling in such a weird, creepy way with a weird look on his face, and he's got like Tails in a headlock, and Tails like, Vector, you're making me uncomfortable. It's really funny. See, the filler stuff is okay. That's just a shining example, because the filler stuff starts off okay. It starts off pretty decent with some decent jokes here and there. It's just that story arc that's just ridiculous, because they're trying to turn into this big space opera, and it just kind of comes off a ripoff of Star Wars and Star Trek and a bunch of other random sci-fi stuff, because the Metarex aren't special. Yeah, they're themed about trees, so what? Yeah, they forced Cosmo to become a spy, so what? There's nothing to them. They're nothing special. The designs are really lame and stuff, just the kind of stuff you'd see on any anime. I've seen way cooler robots in other shows. They don't do anything special, and Eggman's kind of overall absence as the main villain is really, really apparent. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like Sonic. It's like if Sonic just put on the red shirt or something and is like, okay, we're gonna boldly go where no hedgehog has gone before. It fit in this show. And then that also kind of affects the filler, because when they try to do stuff that's a bit more lighthearted and more fun, it feels wrong. Because ultimately, what the show has become now is a dark, weird Shadow the Hedgehog in space. Shadow the Hedgehog, the game, by the way. And now they're doing these weird, cartoony plots with a lot of jokes and a lot of stuff. So even good episodes like Mission Matchup just don't seem like they fit anymore. And then, of course, as the show goes on, it becomes less about fighting the Menarax and stuff, and it becomes a real big focus on Tails and Cosmo. She does get involved in the Menarax stuff, like being forced to become a spy named Whiteseed, but ultimately, Sonic ends up taking a back seat again, not to Chris this time, but to Tails and Cosmo. Sonic does get his stuff to do, of course, and so does Shadow, and yeah, that's fine, but that's another thing with this, is it tries to do way too much. It tries to have an Eggman subplot, tries to have a Shadow subplot, tries to have a Sonic subplot, tries to have a Chris subplot, tries to have a Tails and Cosmo subplot, and tries to have a Menarax plot. It's too much! It's too much! It's too much! And none of it is endearing, except for the Tails and Cosmo stuff eventually, but I'm gonna get to that. Yeah, she gets involved in the main story, yes, but ultimately, it's just not her show. It's supposed to be Sonic. It's Sonic X, not Cosmo X, but really, it gets better. They get more of a chemistry, and she gets a bit more of a personality as the show goes on. And the later episodes start getting a bit more severe. Dark Oak is nothing really special, but he starts getting alright. So yeah, this show was a disappointment to me as a kid. And by the show, I mean the second series, because it's basically a different show. Might as well call it Sonic Y or something, because, you know, why would you do this? Now, I'm not a big anime expert, but I know that a lot of times during like a time skip, they'll change up their genre. Like Naruto Shippuden, from what I know, got a bit darker and stuff. That's fine, but they don't just abandon everything and just turn into something completely different unless it's like a spin-off, usually, as far as I know. I'm not a big expert. Because this has nothing to do with the other stuff. You could call this a spin-off and I would buy it. It's just so different. And it doesn't really continue that much from the original show, because this is like 20 years later, and yet none of them are really aged a day. Well, I guess there's like a lot of time travel and stuff in there, but... So ultimately, this season just has 1 or 2 good episodes, right? Well, yeah, but we're forgetting about the best part of the season, and it's not Mission Matchup. No, you know what I'm talking about. You know, we're going there. We're doing it. The last 2 episodes of Sonic X are some of the hardest episodes I've had to watch for a lot of this stuff that I'm rewatching here. And it's not a bad thing, too. This is one of the most tragic and almost kind of beautiful episodes I've seen, and it's time to talk about what happens. So, they're fighting off the Menarax one last time, just kind of generic, nothing special, seen it before, seen it, yada yada yada. But they finally get the upper hand, and then Super Sonic and Super Shadow come out. And then, yeah, you know that's going to be big, because whenever they come out, something's going to happen. And oh boy, does something happen. Oh boy, does something happen. So, Cosmo's had a big relation with the Menarax this whole time, you know, being a spy in a sense, and her whole race being destroyed by them. So now it's time for her to fulfill her destiny. She goes on full kind of anime girl transformation. The buds on the side of her head get undone and turn into flowers. Her dress expands, so she basically mega evolves. Kind of, because she kind of looks like Ralts. But anyways, she goes into the planet where the Menarax are inhabiting, and they end up becoming one into a giant tree. And then her ghostly image appears in front of the Blue Typhoon, which has this big cannon all set up, because there's a big Sonic cannon that'll shoot Super Sonic and Super Shadow into the planet, destroying the Menarax forever. But they can't do that because, you know, the Menarax are too strong. But now what Cosmo's done has assimilated them into her. And now she's basically is the planet now, along with them. Do the math. They need to destroy the planet to destroy the Menarax. She is essentially a part, or basically the entirety of it. She must die. Why does she have to do this? Well, because she ends up fusing with them and ends up making it the only way that they can be destroyed. It's really long and complicated. I'm doing the best I can, but this is where it gets good. So, Tails is piloting the Blue Typhoon, and Tails is madly in love with Cosmo. Has never had the chance to say it. So now, she is gonna die, and it's gonna be at his hands. And he has no choice. He has to do it, and he knows it, and he's losing his mind. And so are everybody else, even Knuckles, which it felt a little out of character that he got so invested, but even Knuckles was starting to lose his mind at seeing what was about to happen. Cosmo sacrificed herself, and she would have to die, but in the process, her death would save the whole galaxy. Eggman was the only one who didn't really bat an eye at this, because, he's Eggman. And Sonic and Shadow didn't exactly know what was going on because they were inside the cannon. And Cosmo was trying to convince them all, it's what needs to happen, it's what needs to happen. And Tails was trying to convince himself the same too. But he wants to be left alone. He wants to be left alone. So he's just kind of sitting there at the controls, and then he, in a completely silent moment, with almost no music at all, just pushes the button and the cannon goes up. And you just hear the machine whirring and all that going on. And even though there's no real dialogue for this little brief moment, you can feel the gambit of emotions he's feeling. He's feeling angry he has to do this. He feels kind of betrayed that she never told him about this because this was kind of her plan all along. He feels scared because, it's going to be a completely uncertain thing. And most of all, he feels sad that the love of his life is going to have to go in this way. But Eggman gets the machine ready and he tells Tails to fire. And then Tails finally gets his bearings. He's got his nerves of steel going. He screams fire, his hand goes on the button, and he can't do it. And it's not that he can't do it. He goes through a full breakdown. Like, the animation on his face is some of the most heartbreaking stuff I've seen in any show, really. Because if you watch the show especially, and especially if you grew up with it, you know how much that these two had a chemistry. They were almost as close as Sonic and Tails. It's basically like if the female Sonic, which I'm not going to go on to DVR for that, please. I've had enough Sonic fanfiction with one of my old neighbors. But anyways, it's basically killing one of his best friends. And so he's about to push the button, and then his face just melts, basically. It turns into, from this cold, stern, I can do this look full of rage, to just his eyes getting all sad, and he makes these little whimpers, and then he just screams in one of the saddest screams ever, and slams his head on the computer monitor thing, or not monitor, but keyboard, and just starts screaming, saying this wasn't supposed to happen, we were supposed to have a happy ending, this can't be it. And then, out of all the people, it's Eggman who ends up consulting him in an actually pretty sincere voice, saying, don't you want her sacrifice to not go in vain? Don't you want this to actually work out? I know what you're feeling, basically. I know what you're feeling. You went through a lot together, and you've really gotten close, I understand, but this has to happen. Eggman is saying that. Granted, he's manipulated people before, so this could just be a bit of a manipulation thing. But I like to kind of think that he sees what's going on and just kind of wants to get through to his enemy, because they're not enemies right now. They're teaming up to stop the Metarex together. And it's a moment. It's a definite moment. And it's a big one too, because it's not done. We're still going. Because Cosmo talks to Tails and basically affirms everything Eggman said. And then she apologizes for all the problems that she's causing. He starts breaking down again, saying, no, you've never caused me problems. I've always been happy with you. And then he's about to do it again, then screams that he can't do it, puts the cap back on the button, and just breaks down again. And then he starts flashing back to all the moments that they've had together one last time. And then as he's finally in the midst of all of his tears and all of his rage, and just ultimate sorrow, the most he's ever felt in his entire life, screams, Cosmo, I love you, and then slams the button down, and as the credits roll, she dies. What a powerful moment. that genuinely gave me the feels, like every time I watched it. It's hard not to get choked up during that because the animation, the voice, the quiet sounds in the background, the atmosphere. If you're gonna look up anything after this video, watch that moment and tell me you don't feel something. This is one of the best moments in all of Sonic. And maybe it almost makes the third season kind of worthwhile. Okay, no it doesn't, it's really not worthwhile, but this is amazing. Look it up, I'm telling you. And tell me you don't feel something here. Like I said, everything falls perfectly into place. And even though, like I said, I'm not a big anime guy, I mean, I like it for sure. It's just not like one of my favorite things. This is one of my favorite moments in any of them. It's just so sincere and something that came out of a Sonic thing. That's kind of surprising. One of the standout moments in television, ruined by 4Kids. Okay, so what they did to this moment makes me regret all of the things that I said in their defense. It's that bad. So, you know that big emotional breakdown that Tails has? They get rid of it. They get rid of it all. The part where he's just staring lifeless out into the void as he's thinking about what's to come. The quiet ambiance is removed and replaced with cheesy action music. All of this is ruined. And then they cut out the part with his severe mental breakdown, probably because they don't want kids to get scarred by this huge emotional trauma and this big turmoil that Tails is going through. It's embarrassing what they've done to it, and it's not over. The Eggman consolidation thing is ridiculous. It's not assuring him. This is clearly just, let's go, Tails. Come on, what are you waiting for? He's not trying to consult him. He's not trying to make him feel better. He's not trying to ease the situation. He's just, come on, let's go. Why even include it then? That's basically what everyone's already thinking because the moment is ruined. And also because a lot of the romance stuff was edited or removed because of 4Kids, like I mentioned. They knew that they kind of dug themselves in a hole, or even worse, intentionally planned it out this way. Because now he's upset about losing a friend. What? Do you really think he's gonna act like this if he had to kill Rouge or Shadow? I mean, yeah, he'd be upset, but he wouldn't be like this, because one of the problems here is they still keep some of his heartbroken animations. They still keep those facial expressions. Even the ones that they cut out would probably go over the heads of the kids, because, you know, they won't know about them. But the ones that are in there are very clearly not over just losing a friend. Yeah, Tails is a good-natured guy and he wouldn't do this, but he wouldn't have this kind of reaction if it wasn't someone that he really cared about with all of his heart, like Sonic or Cosmo, like it's supposed to be. And then during the flashback to all their good moments, instead of it being this kind of reflection, it's turned into Tails telling the audience it's gonna be okay because she's gonna come back to life because all of her seeds will disperse and it'll sprout new life. It's implied that she'll come back to life through that and that it'll repopulate the entire species, but what? Huh? What? Not only does this not make sense, but you're taking away from one of the most intense scenes I've ever seen. What? And then instead of the Cosmo I love you thing, it's just good luck and goodbye. And look, as far as I go with saying that scene was terrible, that scene messed me up as a kid. Because, like I said, as a kid I was starting to like Cosmo a bit more, just like I did as I rewatched it. So that wasn't just a thing for when I was a kid. But that was tragic. I never expected that to happen. I didn't cry or anything as a kid, but I just spent the rest of the day just kind of pondering what I just watched. I was stunned. All of my friends were stunned because we watched it together. And there was just kind of a lot of silence in the room we were in, just kind of soaking in what we just watched. And we never questioned it. We never batted an eye. It was only until I found out what 4Kids really did in like 2013 that I got curious. But I never really went out of my way to watch it until about a couple weeks ago. That blew me away when I saw the Japanese version. The English version is fine. It's like 5.5 out of 10. But compared to the Japanese version, it's disgraceful. Oh, wow. And then the whole second part of it, which was the final episode, So Long Sonic, is basically them coming to Sonic's world, and Chris just goes back to Earth and he's really sad about it, and then everything gets okay, but Tails is still heartbroken. He still misses Cosmo. All that's left is that one seed, which it's implied in the Japanese one that she'll come back to life that way by planting the seed and allowing new life to form. But in the English version, it's ambiguous. It might be her child like all the others. It might bring her back to life. It may just be a plant that represents her. She may come back in a half state. They don't really explain it. Which, if you're going to over-shelter the kids, explain it so that way they don't have to worry about anything. But overall, it ends with Tails getting over it too fast, and then just kind of everything going back to the status quo. While the Japanese one kind of does do the same, but it kind of makes it, I don't know, the writing is a little bit better on that one. So, Sonic X. Sonic X. Gotta go faster, gotta go fast. Which, by the way, now they're on that, even though that's a meme, I really like that song. It's a nice song, and it's action-filled, and it's fun, and it's catchy, even if it is a little weird sometimes. So that was Sonic X. I will give the Japanese first 2 seasons and the 4Kids first 2 seasons the Archibald Seal of Approval, and both versions of Season 3 the Scowling Seal of Disapproval. I know it's shocking because that had one of my favorite, actually, yeah, I'm going to say my favorite moment in the entire show in it, and some really good episodes in there with the filler stuff towards the end, but the overall Metarex stuff was just stupid. It didn't feel like Sonic, it wasn't engaging, it was just kind of a weird excuse for, I guess, like a Star Wars, Star Trek anime thing with Sonic the Hedgehog characters. It didn't feel right, it wasn't enjoyable, it just wasn't good, and no wonder it was extremely unpopular at the time, or at least in my area. But actually, yeah, I went on and looked at a bunch of the reviews of it, and at least the American audience doesn't really like the season at all. The Japanese audience seems to be kind of split on it, and there are some people that do like the 3rd season, but I couldn't stand it as a kid. And although I don't hate it as much as I did back then, I still don't like it now. It just feels wrong, and I've wanted to talk about it since, well, I first watched it. And yeah, it's kind of surprising that I give the 4Kids dub an Archibald Seal of Approval, but just know that that's mostly for the first season, because the first season was still good. The second season, the arcs were good, but it was just that interference that got bad, and that kind of made it close. But I enjoy both versions. I'm not afraid to say that. I admit it. I like both of them, and there's nothing you can do about it to change my mind. It's just how I feel, and it's just who I am, darn it. I don't know why I said that. But yes, Sonic X. If you want to give it a shot, go ahead and try it. I might recommend starting with the 4Kids dub, actually, so that if you're gonna go all the way through it, which for me, I'm not the kind of person who binge watches the show, so it took me months to get through both of these. But I'd recommend going on the 4Kids one first, then watching Japan after that, and then just kind of doing a little bit of comparison, and maybe then you'll find some stuff that you'll like in each. Because hey, it's good to give both a try. So folks, I think I'm going to do some more 4Kids Foxbox shows coming up. So, see you next time where we get right back at ya.